The morning sun peeked through the thick curtains of Kensington Palace, casting golden rays across the royal bedroom. Prince William opened his eyes slowly, feeling the weight of the day ahead. Today was not just any day. Today, his father would become King of England. William sat up in bed and looked at his wife Kate, who was already awake. Her eyes met his, and they shared a silent moment of understanding. They had been preparing for this day for months, but now that it was here, it felt almost unreal. "Good morning," Kate said softly. "Are you ready?" William nodded. "As ready as I'll ever be." He swung his legs over the side of the bed and walked to the window. He pulled back the curtain and looked out at London. The streets were already filling with people, all eager to catch a glimpse of the royal family on this historic day. Down the hall, the children were waking up too. Prince George, the oldest at 9 years old, was already dressed in his small blue suit when the nanny entered his room. "Good morning, Your Highness," she said with a smile. "You're up early." "I couldn't sleep," George replied, his voice serious. "I was thinking about today. One day that will be me, won't it? Being crowned king." The nanny nodded, touched by his understanding of his future role. "Yes, but not for a very long time." In the room next door, Princess Charlotte was spinning in front of her mirror, watching her dress twirl around her legs. At 7 years old, she understood this was a special day. But to her, it was more exciting because of the pretty clothes and the chance to ride in the fancy car. "Do I look like a princess?" she asked when Kate entered the room. Kate knelt down beside her daughter. "You are a princess, my darling. The most beautiful princess in all of England." Charlotte beamed with pride and practiced her royal wave, making Kate laugh. The real challenge of the morning was getting 4-year-old Prince Louis ready. The youngest Wales child was running around his room in just his underwear, giggling as the nanny chased after him with his formal clothes. "No suit," Louis shouted, diving under the bed. "Want to wear my spaceship shirt." William entered just in time to hear this declaration. He got down on his hands and knees and peered under the bed at his son. "Louis," he said gently, "today is a very special day for Grandpa. All the people of England will be watching. Don't you want to look smart for them?" Louis poked his head out. "Will there be cake?" William laughed. "Yes, I'm sure there will be cake after the ceremony. And can I wave to people from the big car?" "You can wave all you want." This seemed to satisfy Louis, who finally crawled out and allowed himself to be dressed in his formal outfit. By 9 o'clock, the entire family was gathered in the main sitting room. The children sat on the sofa, trying their best not to wrinkle their clothes. George was reading a book about past coronations. Charlotte was practicing her curtsy, and Louis was playing with a small toy crown the nanny had given him to keep him occupied. William and Kate stood by the fireplace, both looking regal in their formal attire. Kate wore a pale blue dress with a matching hat, while William was dressed in his military uniform, medals gleaming on his chest. A knock at the door announced that it was time to leave. The royal cars were waiting outside to take them to Westminster Abbey. William took a deep breath and looked at his family. "Remember," he said to the children, "today is a day that will go down in history. People will remember this day for hundreds of years. And you three are a very important part of it." The children nodded solemnly, even Louis, who seemed to understand the seriousness in his father's voice. As they walked towards the door, William took Kate's hand and squeezed it gently. They were ready to step out into the spotlight, ready to show the world the next generation of the royal family. The royal cars waited outside Kensington Palace, shining black against the morning sun. Police officers stood at attention, and camera crews jostled for the best position. Today, these cars would carry the future of the royal family through the streets of London. William stepped out first, nodding to the staff who held the door. He turned and helped Kate, who looked elegant in her pale blue outfit. Together, they helped the children from the car. George stepped out confidently, his face serious as he remembered his father's words about the importance of the day. Charlotte followed, her eyes wide at the sight of so many people. Louis jumped out last, immediately waving at everyone in sight. "Look at all the people," Louis shouted, pointing at the crowds behind the barriers. Kate gently took his hand. "Yes, darling. They're all here to see Grandpa become king." The family posed briefly for photos, standing together at the palace gates. William had one hand on George's shoulder, while Kate held Louis's hand to keep him from running off. Charlotte stood between her brothers, her back straight, and her chin up just like she had practiced. Soon, they were settled in the first royal car. The inside smelled of leather and polish. The children pressed their faces against the windows as the car pulled away from the palace and joined the procession of vehicles. "Wave to the people," William reminded them as they turned onto the main road. And wave they did. George waved formally, his hand moving side to side just as he had been taught. Charlotte added a little royal flourish that made Kate smile proudly. Louis waved with his whole arm, sometimes with both arms, bouncing in his seat with excitement. Outside, London had transformed. Red, white, and blue flags hung from buildings. People lined the streets 10 deep, many having camped overnight to get a good spot. They waved flags and cheered as the royal cars passed by. "The people love you," Kate told the children. "Remember to smile." As they drove through Trafalgar Square, Charlotte gasped at the sight of the huge crowds. "There are so many people, Mummy. More than in my whole school. More than in all the schools in London," William said with a smile. "This is a very special day." Louis was busy counting the soldiers on horseback who rode alongside the car. 1, 2, 3, 4. He got to 7 before losing track and starting again. George sat quietly, taking it all in. "When Grandpa becomes king, does that mean you become the Prince of Wales, Dad?" he asked suddenly. William nodded. "Yes, that's right. And then one day, I'll be the Prince of Wales after you." "Yes, but not for a very long time," William assured him, just as the nanny had done earlier that morning. George nodded, satisfied with the answer for now. As they drove down the Mall, the grand road leading to Buckingham Palace, the cheers grew louder. Union Jack flags waved in the breeze. Some people threw flowers that landed on the road in front of the cars. Charlotte pointed out a group of children her age, all dressed up and waving homemade flags. "They're wearing crowns made of paper," she said with delight. The car slowed as they approached Westminster Abbey. The ancient church stood tall and proud, its stones having witnessed centuries of royal history. Today, those old walls would witness another chapter being written. Kate checked the children one last time. She straightened George's tie, tucked a strand of hair behind Charlotte's ear, and wiped a smudge from Louis's cheek. "Remember," she said softly, "walk slowly, smile, and do as we practiced." The children nodded. Even Louis seemed to understand the seriousness of the moment now. The car came to a stop. Outside, the crowds roared. Camera flashes lit up the morning like lightning. Guards stood at attention, their colorful uniforms bright against the gray stone of the abbey. William took a deep breath and looked at his family. "Ready?" Kate nodded, her eyes shining with pride. "Ready." The door opened, and the bright light of camera flashes flooded in. It was time for the Wales family to step into the spotlight of history. With William leading the way, they prepared to exit the car and walk into Westminster Abbey, where kings and queens have been crowned for nearly 1,000 years. The fairytale arrival was about to begin. The door of the royal car opened, and all eyes turned to watch. A hush fell over the crowd as Prince William stepped out first, his military uniform gleaming in the sunlight. He straightened his jacket, then turned to help Kate from the car. She emerged gracefully, her blue dress catching the light as she stood beside her husband. Now came the moment everyone was waiting for, the children's appearance. George was first, stepping out with the seriousness of a boy who understood his place in history. He stood tall beside his father, taking his position without being told. Charlotte came next, her small hand reaching for Kate's as she carefully stepped from the car. Her eyes widened at the sight of so many people watching her. For a moment, she looked nervous, but then she remembered her royal training. She smiled and gave a small wave, causing the crowd to burst into delighted applause. Last came Louis, who practically jumped from the car. He immediately began waving with both hands, his face lit up with excitement. A laugh rippled through the crowd at his enthusiasm. William quickly put a gentle hand on his youngest son's shoulder to keep him from running off. "Stay close now," he said quietly. The family stood for a moment at the entrance to Westminster Abbey, creating a perfect picture for the hundreds of cameras pointed their way. The ancient building towered above them, its stones having witnessed the crowning of kings and queens for centuries. "It's so big," Charlotte whispered to Kate, looking up at the tall doors of the Abbey. "Yes, it's a very old and special place," Kate replied. Two lines of guards in bright red uniforms stood on either side of the red carpet that led into the Abbey. They held their swords up, creating an arch for the royal family to walk under. George looked at them with fascination, while Louis pointed excitedly. "Look at the shiny swords, Daddy," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet. People in the crowd smiled at his childish wonder. Even some of the serious-faced guards couldn't help but let their lips twitch up at the corners. William and Kate began walking forward, the children between them. They moved slowly, giving the people and cameras time to see them. Inside, the Abbey was filled with important people from around the world: kings, queens, presidents, and prime ministers. All of them were waiting to watch Charles become king. As they approached the entrance, they passed other members of the royal family. The children remembered their training and gave small bows and curtsies to their relatives. Charlotte's curtsy was especially perfect, making several people murmur with approval. Inside the Abbey, the air felt cool and smelled of flowers and history. Huge flower arrangements stood on either side of the aisle, filling the ancient space with color. The stone floor echoed with their footsteps as they were led to their special seats near the front. Louis looked up at the high ceiling in wonder. "It goes up to the sky." "Mummy," he whispered, not quite managing to keep his voice down. "Almost," Kate smiled, squeezing his small hand. George walked with his hands clasped behind his back, just like his father. He nodded politely to people as they passed. Some of the guests whispered as they watched him, "There walked a future king." Charlotte kept close to Kate, sometimes hiding slightly behind her mother's dress when she felt too many eyes on her. But whenever someone smiled at her, she would smile back sweetly. As they reached their seats, William helped the children sit down in the right order. Louis wanted to sit on Kate's lap, but she gently explained that he needed to sit in his own seat like a big boy. "Just for a little while," she promised. "Then you can sit with me." The family settled in, aware that they were being watched not just by the people in the Abbey, but by millions around the world. Their every expression, their every movement, would be seen and talked about for years to come. George leaned over to William and asked quietly, "What happens now, Dad?" "Now we wait," William replied. "Soon Grandpa will come in, and then the ceremony will start." The children sat as still as they could, though Louis swung his legs back and forth under his seat. The Abbey continued to fill with guests in colorful outfits and impressive uniforms. The Wales family, sitting together in a row, was the picture of royal dignity and normal family love all at once. Westminster Abbey fell quiet as everyone took their seats. The Wales family sat in their special place near the front, where they could see everything. Soft music played as they waited for the ceremony to begin. The inside of the Abbey looked magical, with flowers everywhere and sunlight coming through the colored windows. Louis could not sit still. He kept turning around in his seat to look at all the people behind them. Kate gently put her hand on his leg to keep him from bouncing. "Is Grandpa here yet?" he asked, his voice louder than it should be. "Not yet," Kate whispered. "Remember, we need to use our quiet voices in here." Louis nodded and tried to whisper, but his idea of a whisper was still quite loud. "When will he come?" "Soon," William promised. "Just be patient." Charlotte sat very properly with her hands folded in her lap. She was looking at all the ladies' fancy hats and dresses. When she spotted her aunt, she gave a small wave. Then she leaned over to Kate. "Mummy, my feet don't touch the floor," she whispered. Kate smiled and adjusted her daughter's position so she would be more comfortable. "Better." Charlotte nodded and went back to sitting perfectly still, like the princess she was. George was watching everything with serious eyes. He noticed the special chair where his grandfather would sit to be crowned. He saw the royal crown on its cushion, waiting for its moment. He understood more than his younger siblings about what was happening today. "Dad," he whispered to William, "that crown is very old, isn't it?" William nodded. "Yes, it's been used to crown kings and queens for hundreds of years. And one day, I'll wear it too." George asked. "Yes, but that's a long way off," William said, putting his arm around his son's shoulders. "First it will be me, and that won't be for many years either." The music suddenly changed, becoming louder and more grand. Everyone in the abbey stood up. William helped the children to their feet. Louis stood on his tiptoes, trying to see over the people in front of them. "He's coming," Louis said excitedly. And indeed, King Charles was entering the abbey. He walked slowly down the long aisle, wearing special robes that trailed behind him. Guards and important people walked with him. Everyone watched in silence. Louis waved, even though he wasn't supposed to. Kate quickly caught his hand and held it. Charlotte stood very straight, remembering everything she had been taught about how to behave. George watched his grandfather with new eyes, seeing him not just as grandpa, but as the king he was about to become. As Charles passed by their row, he gave a small nod and smile to his family. The children gave tiny bows and curtsies, just as they had practiced. Louis almost fell over during his bow, but William caught him just in time. The ceremony began with singing and special words. It was long, and the children tried their best to stay still and quiet. Louis started to get restless after the first 10 minutes. He leaned against Kate and whispered, "Is it almost done?" "No, darling," Kate said softly. "It's only just started." Charlotte was fascinated by the beautiful singing. She swayed slightly to the music, her eyes fixed on the choir with their special white clothes. Sometimes she would mouth the words when they sang songs she knew. George sat as still as a statue, watching everything with wide eyes. He knew he was watching history happen. One day, people would talk about this day, and he would say, "I was there. I saw it all." William and Kate shared a proud look over their children's heads. So far, the little ones were behaving wonderfully. People in the abbey and those watching on TV at home were charmed by the sight of the young family. A special moment came when Charles knelt down to receive a blessing. The abbey went completely silent. Even Louis seemed to understand that this was important, and he stopped fidgeting. The children watched as holy oil was placed on their grandfather's head. "What are they doing to Grandpa?" Louis whispered to Kate. "They're making him king," she explained simply. Louis nodded, impressed. He looked up at William. "Will they do that to you one day, Daddy?" William smiled and nodded. "Yes, and many years after that, they'll do it to George." Louis looked at his older brother with new respect. George sat up a little straighter, feeling the weight of his future on his small shoulders. The coronation ceremony continued with its ancient rituals. While the adults watched with serious faces, the cameras kept finding their way back to William and Kate's children. The young royals were becoming the unexpected stars of the day. Charlotte sat with perfect posture, her small hands folded in her lap. When the choir began to sing a song she recognized from school, her lips moved silently along with the words. A camera caught this sweet moment, and people watching at home smiled at the young princess's earnest face. "You know this song?" Kate whispered, noticing her daughter's mouthing of the words. Charlotte nodded. "We sing it at school," she whispered back. "It's about God saving the king." Kate smiled proudly. Her daughter was connecting her normal school life with this grand royal occasion. Meanwhile, Louis was finding it harder and harder to sit still. The ceremony had been going for nearly 30 minutes, which was a very long time for a 4-year-old boy. He began to swing his legs under his chair and tug at his collar. "It's itchy," he complained to Kate in a whisper that wasn't really a whisper. Kate reached into her small purse and pulled out a tiny toy car she had brought for just this moment. She slipped it into Louis's hand. His face lit up, and he began to quietly roll the car back and forth on his leg, making very soft vroom sounds. People watching on TV saw this moment and loved Kate for being a normal mother, prepared with a distraction for her restless child. George, always the most serious of the three, was watching every part of the ceremony with great attention. When the Archbishop raised the heavy crown above Charles's head, George leaned forward slightly. This would be his grandfather's crown, then his father's, and someday, many years in the future, his own. William noticed his son's intense focus and placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. They shared a look that seemed beyond George's 9 years, a look of understanding about duty and destiny. As the crown was placed on Charles's head, a great cheer went up in the abbey. The sound startled Louis, who jumped in his seat and dropped his toy car. It rolled a few feet away from their row. Without thinking, Louis slipped off his chair to get it. Kate reached for him, but he was too quick. He ducked under the row of seats in front of them and grabbed his car. On his way back, he looked up and saw his grandfather now wearing the crown. Louis's mouth opened in a perfect O of wonder. "Grandpa has the big hat now," he said, loud enough for several people nearby to hear. A ripple of quiet laughter moved through that section of the abbey. Even some of the most serious officials couldn't help but smile at the innocent comment. William quickly lifted Louis back into his seat. Instead of looking embarrassed by his son's outburst, he gave Louis a small wink that said, "Yes, you're right. But let's be quiet now." Charlotte was trying very hard not to giggle at her little brother. She covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes dancing with amusement. George rolled his eyes like only an older brother can, but there was a small smile on his lips too. A photographer caught this perfect family moment. Louis being lifted by William, Charlotte trying not to laugh, George's patient expression, and Kate's loving look at her family. The photo would appear on front pages around the world the next day. As the ceremony moved to its next part, the children settled down again. Charlotte noticed a butterfly that had somehow found its way into the abbey. It fluttered near one of the high windows, its wings catching the colored light. She tugged gently on Kate's sleeve and pointed up. "Look, Mummy," she whispered. "A butterfly came to see Grandpa become king." Kate followed her daughter's gaze and smiled at the beautiful thought. "Yes, I think you're right," she whispered back. "Even the butterflies want to be here today." The simple, sweet exchange between mother and daughter was caught on camera. Later, people would say it was moments like these, normal family moments in the middle of royal grandeur, that made the Wales family so special. They were royal, yes, but they were also just a family of 5, experiencing an important day together. The world was falling in love with these 3 young royals, who brought life and realness to an ancient ceremony. The coronation ceremony had been going on for over an hour now. The adults sat still, watching each part with respect. But for the 3 young Wales children, sitting quietly for so long was becoming very hard. Louis had been well behaved for a long time, playing quietly with his toy car, but now he was getting tired and fidgety. He whispered something to Kate, who leaned down to hear him better. "I need to go to the toilet," Louis said, a bit too loudly. Kate whispered back that he would have to wait just a little longer. Louis's face showed this was not the answer he wanted. He began to wiggle in his seat, his face getting redder by the second. William noticed and gave Kate a questioning look. She mouthed the words "bathroom" to him, and he nodded in understanding. This was a problem. They couldn't just get up and leave in the middle of the ceremony. Charlotte, seeing her little brother's discomfort, reached into her small purse and pulled out a sweet. She had saved it from earlier and thought it might distract Louis. She passed it to Kate, who gave her a grateful smile before unwrapping it quietly and giving it to Louis. For a few minutes, this worked. Louis sat happily sucking on his sweet, his bathroom needs temporarily forgotten. But then, during a moment of complete silence in the ceremony, just as the Archbishop was saying some very important words, Louis decided he had been good for long enough. "I'm bored," he announced in a voice that seemed to echo through the entire abbey. Several things happened at once. Kate's hand quickly covered Louis's mouth. William tried to look serious, but couldn't hide a small twitch of his lips. George put his head in his hands in embarrassment, and Charlotte's eyes went wide with shock at her brother's boldness. The most surprising reaction came from King Charles himself. Though he was in the middle of a solemn ceremony, a small smile appeared on his face for just a second at the sound of his grandson's voice. Many of the important people in the abbey tried to keep serious faces, but quiet laughter spread through the rows. The Archbishop, used to unexpected moments after years of church services, simply paused for a moment, then continued as if nothing had happened. William quickly stood up and lifted Louis into his arms. "I think we need a little break," he whispered to Kate. He carried Louis toward a side door, where a royal aide was waiting to help. As they passed the front rows, Louis waved happily at everyone, completely unaware of the break in tradition he had caused. Some of the guests waved back, unable to resist his charm. "Why is everyone looking at me, Daddy?" Louis asked as they reached the door. "Because you're very interesting," William replied diplomatically. While William took Louis for his much-needed bathroom break, Kate stayed with George and Charlotte. Charlotte was still in shock that her brother had been so loud. "Will Louis get in trouble?" she whispered to her mother. Kate shook her head. "No, darling. He's just being a normal little boy. It's hard to sit still for so long." George leaned over to his mother. "I bet this will be in all the newspapers tomorrow," he said wisely. Kate nodded. "Probably, but that's part of our life. Sometimes the things we do or say get shared with everyone." "Even the embarrassing things?" Charlotte asked. "Especially the embarrassing things," Kate said with a small smile. After a few minutes, William returned with a much happier Louis. He was walking now instead of being carried, and he had clearly been reminded to be quiet, because he was tiptoeing in an exaggerated way that was almost more noticeable than walking normally would have been. As Louis climbed back into his seat, he gave a big thumbs up to his siblings. Charlotte giggled behind her hand, and even George smiled at his little brother's antics. What could have been an embarrassing moment had instead become one of the most endearing of the day. People watching at home found themselves smiling at the reality of royal life with young children. It showed that even in the grandest ceremony, family is still family, and 4-year-olds will be 4-year-olds, whether they are royal or not. The ceremony continued, but now many eyes stayed on Louis, wondering what he might do or say next. The little prince had stolen the show without even trying. After the long ceremony in Westminster Abbey, the royal family headed to Buckingham Palace. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, when the new king and his family would appear on the famous balcony to wave to the crowds. Inside the palace, the children were finally able to move around freely after sitting still for so long. Louis ran down the grand hallway. His energy fully returned. "Louis, be careful," Kate called after him, but with a smile on her face. It was good to let the children be themselves for a little while before they had to be royal again. Charlotte walked beside her mother, looking at all the paintings on the walls. "Did all these people used to be kings and queens?" she asked, pointing at the portraits. "Many of them," Kate answered. "They're your family from long ago." George stayed close to William, asking questions about what would happen next. "Will there be planes, Dad?" he wanted to know. William nodded. "Yes, the Royal Air Force will fly over while we're on the balcony." "The red, white, and blue smoke planes?" Louis asked excitedly, running back to join them after hearing this news. "Yes, those ones," William confirmed. The children were taken to a special room to have a quick snack and fix their clothes before the balcony appearance. Charlotte's hair ribbon needed to be readied, and Louis had somehow managed to get a chocolate stain on his shirt. "How did you get chocolate?" Kate asked as she tried to clean the spot with a damp cloth. "We didn't have any chocolate." Louis just smiled mysteriously. "A nice lady gave me some when we were coming out of the Abbey." Kate and William shared a look that said, "That's our Louis." Soon, a palace worker came to tell them it was time. The family walked through the grand rooms of the palace to the doors that led to the balcony. Through the glass, they could see the massive crowd that filled the mall. The wide road leading to the palace. There were thousands of people as far as they could see, all waving flags and cheering. "So many people," Charlotte said, her eyes wide. "Are they all here to see us?" Louis asked. "They're here to see Grandpa as the new king," William explained. "But yes, they want to see us too." The doors opened, and King Charles walked out first, wearing his crown and royal robes. Queen Camilla walked beside him. The crowd roared with excitement. Then William, Kate, and the children stepped onto the balcony. The noise was incredible. Louis put his hands over his ears for a moment, then looked up at Kate. "It's very loud, Mummy," he said. Kate nodded and took his hand. "Wave to the people," she encouraged him. And so they waved. George waved in the proper royal way he had been taught, his hand moving from side to side. Charlotte did her special princess wave, adding a little twist of her wrist that made people smile. And Louis, being Louis, waved with his whole arm, sometimes using both arms and his entire body. "Look at all the flags," Charlotte said, pointing to the sea of red, white, and blue below them. "There must be millions of people," George said, trying to count but giving up quickly. The crowd's cheering grew even louder when they saw the children pointing and talking. People loved seeing the young royals react with such natural excitement. Then came the moment the children had been waiting for. In the distance, they could hear the sound of airplane engines. Louis began jumping up and down. "The planes are coming. The planes are coming," he shouted. William lifted Louis up so he could see better. Kate put her arm around Charlotte, and George stood tall on his own, eyes fixed on the sky. The crowd below turned to look too. And there they were, the Royal Air Force planes flying in perfect formation. As they passed over Buckingham Palace, they released streams of red, white, and blue smoke that trailed behind them in the sky. "Wow!" Louis shouted, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Look at the colors." The planes roared overhead, and the crowd cheered even louder. Charlotte clapped her hands in delight. Even serious George couldn't help but break into a huge smile. It was the perfect family moment, captured on cameras and shared with the world. The new king standing proudly, while the future of the monarchy, William and his children, showed their joy and wonder beside him. As the planes disappeared into the distance, Louis turned to William and asked loudly, "Can we go on those planes one day, Daddy?" William laughed. "Maybe when you're older." The crowd below laughed too, charmed by the little prince's endless enthusiasm. After the balcony appearance, the royal family went back inside Buckingham Palace. While the public celebrations continued in the streets of London, the Wales family had a few quiet moments away from the cameras and crowds. "You were all wonderful," Kate said to the children as they walked through the grand hallway. "I'm so proud of how well you behaved." "Even me?" Louis asked, looking up with big eyes. "Even when I said I was bored in the Abbey?" William laughed and ruffled his youngest son's hair. "Yes, even you. Everyone understands that it's hard for a young boy to sit still for so long." A palace worker showed them to a special room where food and drinks were waiting. The children's eyes lit up at the sight of sandwiches, fruit, and small cakes arranged on silver trays. "Can we eat now?" Charlotte asked politely. "I'm very hungry." "Yes, please help yourselves," Kate said. "It's been a long day." The children didn't need to be told twice. George carefully selected a cucumber sandwich. Charlotte took a strawberry and a small cake with pink icing. Louis went straight for the chocolate biscuits, taking 3 before Kate gently suggested he might want to eat something else as well. While the children ate, William and Kate had a moment to talk quietly. "They did so well today," William said, looking at their 3 children with pride. "Better than I could have hoped." Kate nodded. "They understand more than we give them credit for, even Louis in his own way." As they spoke, a royal photographer was allowed in to take some informal pictures. The children were used to having their photos taken and barely noticed as the photographer moved around the room, capturing natural moments of the family relaxing after their big day. The first photo showed George helping Louis pour a glass of juice, carefully holding the heavy jug with both hands. The second caught Charlotte checking her reflection in a mirror and straightening her tiara. The third was of all 3 children sitting together on an antique sofa. Louis with chocolate around his mouth, Charlotte wiping it off with a napkin, and George looking on with a mix of embarrassment and amusement. These would become some of the most loved images from the day, the royal children being normal children behind the palace doors. After they had eaten, the children were allowed to explore the room. Charlotte found a collection of old photographs on a side table. "Look," she called to her brothers. "It's Daddy when he was little." The children gathered around the photo of young William at a past coronation, standing next to his mother, Princess Diana, and his father, who was now King Charles. "You were smaller than me," Louis said to William, amazed that his tall father had once been a little boy. "I was about George's age in that picture," William explained. "That was when great-grandma became queen. And now she's in heaven. And Grandpa is king," Charlotte said thoughtfully. "That's right," Kate said, joining them by the photos. "And one day, far in the future, it will be Daddy, and then George." George looked at the photo of his father as a boy, then at his own reflection in a nearby mirror. The resemblance was clear, the same serious eyes, the same sense of duty already visible on his young face. A knock at the door announced that it was time for the family to join the other royals for official photographs. Before they left the room, William knelt down to speak to his children. "There will be more sitting still and smiling for pictures," he warned them. "Do you think you can be good for a bit longer?" "Yes, Daddy," Charlotte promised. "I'll try," said George. Louis just nodded, his mouth full of one last stolen chocolate biscuit. Kate laughed and wiped the chocolate from Louis's face with a napkin. "That will have to do." As they walked to the palace throne room for the official photos, Louis slipped his small hand into William's larger one. Charlotte held Kate's hand on the other side, and George walked between them, straight and tall, already looking like the future king he would one day become. The day was not over yet, but already the Wales family had captured the hearts of people around the world with their perfect mix of royal dignity and normal family love. As evening fell over London, the Wales family returned to their apartment at Kensington Palace. The crowd still filled the streets, celebrating into the night. But for William, Kate, and their children, the official duties of the day were finally done. Louis, who had been running on excitement all day, was now very tired. He leaned against William's shoulder as they walked through their front door. His eyes were already half closed. "I think someone needs bed," Kate said softly, smoothing Louis's hair. "Not tired," Louis mumbled, even as he yawned widely. "Of course not." William smiled, carrying his youngest son toward the stairs. Charlotte and George followed behind, both tired but still talking about everything they had seen and done that day. "Did you see how many people were watching us?" Charlotte asked George. "Millions and millions. And they'll be talking about today for years," George replied, understanding even at his young age how important the day had been. While William took Louis upstairs to get ready for bed, Kate led the other 2 children into the living room. The television was on, showing highlights from the coronation. The children stopped to watch, fascinated to see themselves on the screen. "Look, there I am." Charlotte pointed as the TV showed her curtsying to her grandfather. And there's Louis saying he was bored. George laughed, as that now famous moment played for what must have been the 100th time that day. Kate watched her children watching themselves, and smiled. They were too young to fully understand their place in history, but someday they would look back on this day and realize what it meant. Upstairs, William was helping Louis into his pajamas. The little boy was fighting sleep, wanting to talk about the day. The planes were the best part, Louis said sleepily as William pulled the covers up. Next time, can I ride in one? Maybe when you're older, William said, just as he had on the balcony. Now it's time to sleep. Was I a good prince today, Daddy? Louis asked, his eyes serious despite his tiredness. William's heart melted at the question. You were the best prince, he assured his son, just by being yourself. By the time Kate came upstairs with the other children, Louis was fast asleep, still clutching the toy car that had kept him occupied during the ceremony. Charlotte changed into her nightgown and let Kate brush her long hair. Mummy, will people remember today? She asked. Yes, darling, Kate told her. People will remember today for a very long time. Will they remember us too? Me and George and Louis. Especially you three, Kate smiled. You stole the show. George was the last to get ready for bed. As William helped him with his pajama buttons, the boy looked thoughtful. Dad, he said quietly, I was watching Grandpa today when they put the crown on his head. He looked different. William nodded, understanding what his son meant. That's because in that moment, he wasn't just your grandpa. He was taking on a very important job. The same job you'll have one day. And then me, George said. That's right, William replied, but not for a very long time. For now, you just need to be a boy. Learn things, have fun, be with your family. When all three children were finally in bed, William and Kate sat together in their living room, watching the last of the day's coverage on television. The news was full of pictures and stories about the coronation, but what caught their attention were the many photos and clips of their children. They're calling it the Wales Children's Coronation, Kate said, reading a headline on the screen. William smiled. They stole the spotlight without even trying. Just by being themselves, Kate agreed. On the television, they showed a montage of moments from the day. Charlotte's perfect curtsy, George's serious face as he watched the crown being placed on his grandfather's head, and of course, Louis's many expressions and antics. They brought something special to the day, William said. Something real. Kate leaned her head against his shoulder. In the middle of all that tradition and ceremony, they reminded everyone that the royal family is still a family. Outside, the celebrations continued. Inside, the Wales family rested after their big day. The story of the Fairytale coronation, where three young children stole the hearts of the world, would be told for many years to come. Not because they were perfect royal children, but because they were real children experiencing an extraordinary day in their own unique ways.